Good morning and welcome to the session 7, which is looking at the arable crops and sugar. This is day 2 of the EU Outlook Conference, looking at agriculture to 2031. This morning we're going to be discussing 3 different aspects. We're going to be looking at production, consumption, and the global dimension. As with all the sessions, we look forward to engaging with you because we have a panel who'll be ready to take your questions. So you need to go to slido.com. You need to put in the code AGRI Outlook, and you need to choose session 7. And that's your opportunity to put questions to our panel. To start us off, we'd like to have a message from a farmer. And I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker, who's going to be Pedro Gallardo from Spain. He's also the Vice President of COPA, and he's going to share with us his experience as a farmer living through some of these questions. Pedro, you have 10 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
So please, because it's long, so we go fast. Please, next slide. First, this is our challenge. We have challenge like in production, in the Green Deal, of course, the CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy. We have the climate change in our farms, and of course we have the digitalization. But of course the farmers are ready to all of them, but we need to be in the center of the debate. Next, please. This is my farm. I live in the south of Andalusia in Spain. I live in the farm 6 kilometers to the sea, to the city. We produce durum wheat and sunflower because it's a dry farmer, drought sometimes. Next, please. I involve my family in the farming business. My children are also help me in the farming, and also they are in the medias when we need to make something with them. Thank you. Next, please. We apply a lot of technology in the farming, like for example, we use drone to detect where we need more to apply more fertilizer. Next, please. And we have a lot of challenge in the future. Of course, we need to feed the population growing. We have the climate change. We have less arable area, and we have the problem of the water because we have less and less. Next, please. Population is going to increase, and the demand of the third countries is going to be different in the future. Next, please. The population is going to be rising till 2100 by United Nations, and we can see in the different regions. Next, please. Now we can see like Africa is going to grow very fast, almost 3 times more people than now, and we have to support this, and we have to feed the population in the world, not only in Europe. So we need to be solidarity with the third world. Next, please. How to feed this population, how to need to feed these people. Okay, we can do it. We can do it with the proprietary technology. Next, please. And arable land is reducing, especially in Europe and in the North Hemisphere. We can see like in southern countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Africa, or Brazil, Argentina, is growing the arable land. But we have lost around 27% in last 40 years in Europe. Next, please. And this is another important issue, that we need to make a healthy diet in different countries, in Africa, for example, South Asia, where people demand more protein and where people demand diverse diet. Next, please. This year, we have a lot of problem in farming business because we are receiving a lot of drought, a lot of rising costs in our farming, and we have checked like energy is 3 more times priced than last year, fertilizing, the seed. So this year is complicated, and we don't know uncertainly when the situation will be much better for the inputs, because it's a difficult season for now. Okay, next, please. Of course, the crop production starts with the rice seeds. Crop production starts with the high quality seed. We demand for the high quality seed. The new plant breeding techniques could be the solution. We think it's the solution. European farmers cannot lose more time with the technology we have right now, because nobody is using a telephone, a mobile, or 20 years or 30 years old mobile. We use a new mobile every 2 or 3 years. This is the same we need in the seed. And of course, we need an urgent need of update interpretation of the mutagenesis exception into the GMO directive. Next, please. In the crop fertilization, the aim should be to apply the fertilization to the crop as accurately as possible. The precision and digital farming benefit agricultural activities by optimizing the application of fertilizers and PPS, because it is important to protect our crops and to improve the efficiency of the crop fertilization and provide both environmental and economical benefits, because we need to be sustainable, but we need the 3 waves of the sustainable. The use of advisory services or programs, for example, that target the nutrient efficiency is something that we are going to demand in the next year. Next, please. Crop protection, of course, we use the plant protection products to grow the health, growth and competitive terms, and to ensure that the consumer demand are satisfied. We produce safe food, feed and non-food agricultural products to safeguard them, and of course the environmental, because we are the most important to keep the environmental for our future generation. Integrated pest management, IPM, combines various and different agricultural practices to reduce the impact of agriculture, environmental, of course, and the use of integrated pest management tools are the key to be sustainable agricultural production in the terms in the European Union. And of course, it takes a long time for this product to be fully available. So we need to shorten the time to be used in the farming. Of course, the PPS will remain an essential an element in the IPM. Next, please. Okay, this is what I was talking. Next, please. Of course, the use of technology. The technology right now is one of the most important key in farming. We cannot use the same technology like one decade, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or 30 years ago. Now we have different applications. We have drone, for example, application. We have precision farming. We have more technology in a tractor than in a house, than in a flight, than in a car. But we need to apply this technology. We cannot wait for a long time. Next, please. And of course, about the technical innovation is the answer. We consider that the technology and the farmers need to adequate toolbox. We don't use a telephone like the same telephone in the last 20 years. So the new alternative, for example, PPS, should allow to increase the quantity and the quality in agricultural output, while the using fewer and to be more precise input. This is something special for us and very important. Research also into a develop of alternative to IPM is very important, and of course the research and the innovation needs to take account the different crops, production and the climate region. Where, for example, in produce Mediterranean production, but now we have farmers producing subtropical production. We are producing avocado, we are producing kaki, and we need technology to these different crops to manage the crops. Next, please. Of course, the technical innovation is the answer, and any alternatives to put farmers. We need to have this technology. And the farmers and agri cooperatives are already investing and applying innovative solutions to keep the business competitiveness and, of course, sustainable, because this is also important in us. For a lot of farmers, it's still difficult to afford some new tools ready in the market, and some tools that use our competitors. So we need to short the time. And of course, this investment for now is a high cost for the farmers. So we need to be more effective to produce and to have this technology. And investment in agricultural system and circumstances should be continued in the future. We cannot stop because our competitors are going to use in the future. And next, please, is finally, this is my final presentation. So thank you very, very much for this time to be here and to represent the sector, the agribusiness sector. And of course, thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Pedro. That was a whirlwind tour through some of the big picture issues that are facing farmers. And I think one thing that really shines through in your presentation is the pride in farmers in producing food that is good quality, that Europeans want and need. But I'm very interested that you gave us this bigger picture, that over the last 40 years, we've lost 27% of our arable land in Europe. And you've highlighted that there is a population growth and there's a balance that farmers need to strike between making sure that their farms produce year on year. So there's a daily management decisions, and then understanding the bigger picture over the longer term of climate change and differences in patterns of consumption. So thank you for giving us an insight into these trade-offs and reflections that farmers need to make. And I hear very clearly your call for financial support in research and development and for technology costs to help farmers invest to make this transition. And what we're talking about is a transition on how we can produce more in terms of outputs with fewer inputs, fewer chemicals, fewer fertilizers, and making sure that we can use the land in the most efficient and sustainable way. So we're now going to hear from a few panelists who will share their perspective in different areas. And I'm delighted to introduce the three people who will join me. I have Hemeline Macré, who's from Strategy Grains and Tallage, so deals with oil seeds. Jana Kleinschmidt von Lengerfield, who's from Co-Cereal, so she'll discuss some of the trade issues. And we have Jérôme Bignon, who's from the Crystal Union, so he'll discuss sugar issues. So there we have three members of the panel, and I have the same question to them, and I invite you, the audience, to participate through Slido. Give us your questions, or you can even answer the question yourself, because what we want to know is what each sector is doing to assist in this transition of producing more in a safe way, but using fewer inputs including energy. We heard from Pedro that energy costs have gone up almost 300%. So this is the big challenge for farmers. How do they make a viable living while producing more, protecting the environment, and doing it with few external inputs? Hemeline, perhaps I could start with you. Could you share what's happening in your sector?
Sure. The expanding agricultural feedstock needs, the growing demand for food, protein, and the increasing needs for agricultural sustainability, on top of rising adoption of organic farming practices, are the main elements that will make agriculture evolve by 2030. So several action plans are already taken in the agricultural sector and agricultural industries to improve sustainability. And this move will, of course, strengthen in the future. So with the expected lower use of chemically synthesized pesticides and fertilizer and the increase in organic production, biostimulants are going to be more and more utilized in the organic manure to improve soil fertility and also plant health. And innovations and increasing research and development in this field are anticipated to contribute to the transition of to a more sustainable agriculture. And sustainability is also in animal nutrition is also a subject which is addressed for a few years by animal feed producers. Certificates of traceability are being increasingly used and developed in the sector. Some projects are happening already in association with researchers to develop policies and tools, for example, to decouple soy from deforestation. And on top of that, the development of carbon credit-based use for feed additives to mitigate to mitigate methane production in cattle is also going to contribute to the transition to a more sustainable agriculture. On top of that, I must say that a frank discussion on the challenges of addressing enteric greenhouse gas production in animals raised on pasture has been started in the feed sector already. And to finish, regarding the biofuel industry, sustainability certificates are widely used and developed. Currently, some actors in the EU biodiesel sector and industry are working on strengthening the partnerships with small soybean producers and with small oil palm smallholders through various programs to increase their productivity and sustainability, and this should develop further in the future.
Excellent, thank you, Emily, and I'm sure we'll come back to you later with more questions, and indeed questions from the audience. Please put your questions in the Slido, so we want to know what your questions are and your contributions to this issue. Let me now turn to Jana. Can you give us a sense in the area of particularly the cereals sector, looking at trade issues and from the Trade Association? We've got very high volatility in the commodity prices. We heard about that yesterday. We just heard from Hemeline how certificates and looking at the soil is helping. But where else can you give us some insight for the cereal sector? What's happening? How farmers are adapting and preparing to try and deliver more, produce more with fewer inputs?
Thanks very much for the opportunity. I'm very thankful to the statements that Pedro has made and the high quality of food farmer supply here in the European Union. Our role as traders and also as processors of these high quality products that are being supplied by European farmers is to connect the local supply with the global markets. And this is also an element that ensures, I think, a key element for the farmers, which is income as well. So if there's this connection between the global supply, the local supply with the global market, helps to generate income for farmers. The other thing, which is also, I think, a key element of sustainable production, is that we connect also this highly productive region that the EU actually is, because we have the highest yields per acre compared to other regions in this world, and that we connect them with the deficit areas. So trade, this is a very efficient mechanism in that context, that this connectivity can be established through the supply chains as well as through trade. And thus we are also contributing to resilience and food security around the globe. If we want to come back to Pedro's argument about the growing population and what we also heard this morning from the Commission, if we look at the growing population regions, which are mainly happening, as Pedro said, either in Africa or in Southeast Asia. And that's where the food supplies need to go. So trade is a key element here. We can take other examples at the same time. If we look at the biofuel sector, for example, we have introduced sustainable supply chains from any origin. If we think about the European Union's Renewable Energy Directive regulation. So we do the calculations of our biofuels specifically in Germany, because the system that has been set up in Germany, and I'm based in Germany here working for ADM at the same time, is a system that is being independently audited and also certified that supply chains assure sustainable production and the CO2 emission reduction that we provide to the market through the biofuels is actually a proven case, if you like, and this is verified by certification. There's many other ways that you can support sustainable production. If this is one of the solutions that we are looking into, and we have heard this from Hemeline before, is working with farmers in the origins. And I think one key element here is also education. I think education is a key element. I believe that we have the most educated farmers in the European Union. when it comes to production systems, when it comes, and Pedro said that the equipment that they use on the farms is so advanced and so full with technology that it just doesn't compare to anything else that we have. And I think these things are key going forward to allow people to understand how to apply the tools that we already have today for sustainable production. And then I would probably leave it at this for the time being and return with further questions.
Thank you very much, Jana. Let me now bring in Jérôme to get the perspective from the sugar sector. And again, the same question, the trend going forward, how do we make sure that we can both respect the quality of the soil, so make sure it's still fertile, while producing more but using fewer inputs?
Thanks. I would like as an industry focus on our main target, which is the decarbonization of the sugar sector. You know, since 1990, European sugar companies have reduced their emission by half, and we think we will be able to achieve the 2030 target, which is a 55% reduction. To do that, the sugar company have improved their energy efficiency. They have gradually replaced coal by natural gas, and they have relocated the production in the most efficient areas. But now the challenge is to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And of course, a paradigm shift is needed. And we have a specificity in our sector. First, we are an heavy industry, and the transformation must be done over a long period of time, of course, because we need big investment. Of course, sugar sector is very specific because we need sugar beet. Without sugar beet, we have no sugar production. Donc sugar beet has to remain competitive in the crop rotation. Also, another specificity is we have a seasonal activity. We produce the sugar during 4 months, starting September, ending February. The other point is the process, the sugar process, is more or less the same over the world. You know, you have few difference between processes for can or for beet, meaning that at world level, there is also no prospect of technological disruption to the process in the medium term. And sugar is also liberalized. You know, the quota system ended in 2017, and therefore our sector is exposed to international competition. Saying that, what the result of that is sugar factories are located in the middle of beet field, far from the major urban center area, and which limits the access to the major energy networks, and explain, for example, why in our plant we have a self-production of electricity by cogeneration. In addition, we need to know that the sugar sector has been structurally in deficit of ETS quotas from free allowance since 2018. And of course, regarding the price of CO2 today, which is around 70 euro per ton, even today, even higher, the financial impact is significant and penalize investment in our sector. Now how we can achieve carbon neutrality in 2050? First, of course, we can continue to improve the energy efficiency of our processes. And for example, Cristal-Union have been working and investing for decades to reduce its energy consumption, but the saving potential now is becoming limited. We think we can achieve less than 10% by 2030 and up to 15% by 2050. So the sector now will have to accelerate the replacement of fossil energy mainly natural gas, with carbon-free energy. As part of this substitution, the sector will have to choose between different sources of carbon-free energy. First, of course, biomass in own, for example, pulp, or external resources with the use in methanization or combustion. Also, we could use electricity from the grid, from renewable sources or nuclear origin if allowed, and of course, in the long term, perhaps hydrogen-based technology. Whatever, the decarbonization of sugar plants will not be possible with a single technology. We will need several solutions, and depending on the specificity of each plant, and some of these solutions are not yet viable today at the industrial stage, and they will need to be competitive. It is the focus I share with you regarding decarbonization of our sector.
Thank you very much, Jérôme. It was very detailed, but I think you gave us some insight into the realities of sugar beet farming.
Exactly.
And you also gave us some perspective at the global level, which I know we're going to come to towards the end of the session. We've received a question from the audience that I'd like to invite the panel to reflect on. And the question says, technology and intensification is certainly one way to go forward, and it's a direction, a vision that's been mentioned. But what do you think of less intensive production models as a way of our long-term reduction of our environmental impact? So again, this is questioning that direction of travel. We heard from Pedro and from some of the other speakers just how much farming in Europe has become a precision, high-tech, mechanized process that involves all of these different tools and techniques to work in a competitive way. And that question from the audience says, is there another way? Are there futures that can also be part of this vision that might be less intensive? So let me start by Hemeline. Would you like to answer that question? And briefly, because we only got 5 minutes for all three of you to answer, so just 1 minute on it. Is there room in this vision for European farming of a route that's less intensive and less technology derived?
Yes, shortly, the future of the agriculture in the EU should be mainly based on organic farming and on organic feedstock production. This model is much less intense than the current, I would say, usual agriculture in European Union. So this is a challenge because if we want to produce 25% of organic production by 2030, we need to improve the access to technicals, to stimulants that fits with the organic labels. And I would say the second issue is that we have to find a way to limit the impact of this raising practices of organic farming on yields. And because, European production is really key to address the food security at the European and at the world level. So I would say that the level of production of Europe by 2030 must be assessed, taking into account its impact on the environment, but also it must also take into account the fact that we still the world still needs Europe to produce enough wheat or crops to feed some regions in the world that can't do it by themselves.
Thank you very much, Hemeline. Jana, briefly, is there a space in the vision for your sector for some less intensive and less mechanized approaches?
I don't see any challenge with technology. I think technology is key. And technology is part of the solution to a more sustainable agriculture. I cannot understand what is wrong about using technology to be efficient. And I think that's a key driver for food security globally. And I think we need more technology than less technology. And with the intensification, I think there's a few things that we should not forget. If we reduce the production per hectare, then we also create a lot less supplies. And this will, of course, have an impact on the prices for agricultural raw materials. And the EU has one main goal, is to have enough supplies for the European communities for affordable food. So is there a contradiction? That needs to be seen with all the mechanisms that the Commission is also trying to implement with Farm to Fork and the Green Deal and all those things. So the mechanisms that were laid out, do they really work? What is the impact that we have to expect from those mechanisms to come? And I think technology is one of the key solutions that help keep food at an affordable price and also help farmers to be productive and cost efficient at the same time. And, you know, we haven't spoken about leakage effects yet. So if we reduce production on the European acreage by introducing more ecological farming and all that stuff, then this needs to be produced in other regions and other areas that have a lot less productive arable land.
Okay.
So you need, for the same output, you need like 2, 3, 4 times as much land as you need in the European Union. I don't think that's sustainable. So we need to discuss these topics as well.
Thank you. And just very briefly, Jérôme, can I bring you in? Maybe I could reframe this issue and say that perhaps what we're asking here is not so much about the lack of technology, but I think it's more to do with scale. We heard yesterday from some fantastic small-scale farmers who farm fruit and vegetables. So perhaps this question is really asking, in the vision of how we feed more people with less input, what's the space for the small-scale farmers who perhaps don't have either the money or the capacity to have the very high-tech, intensive tools? Perhaps that's a question you might like to comment on, Jérôme.
But I think there is no opposition, because organic farmer is more for vegetables, something like that. But we are an industry, and I fully share the opinion of Jana. What we need is more innovation, more technology, if we want to achieve, on one side, food security, and on the other side, less input for producing the same volume. I think we need to be pragmatic at the end. But what for sure we need is no ban if we have no alternative. It is our main issue. We think that we cannot ban product or protection plant product or reduce synthetic fertilizer if we have no effective alternative.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jérôme. And we're now going to move to the other part of the production and consumption equation. And I'm delighted to introduce, from the European Commission, from DG AGRI, Dangis de Nekrasius, who's going to give us a little bit of the perspective around the issues of the consumption patterns. Dangis.
Good morning. So consumer behavior is the driving force behind the demand for agricultural products, including arable crops and sugar. Some of the trends of this behavior are well established, while some of them are changing and some of them are just new and emerging. So we try to capture these trends in our outlook process and integrate into our report. Here are some of them with particular relevance to arable crops and sugar. First, we expect to see less demand for livestock sector. In particular, we expect less demand from the pig meat sector in the European Union, driven by lower export demand. Also, we forecast less grain and oilseed meal demand from the beef sector, which is shifting towards more sustainable, extensive grass-fed production, which is better suited for organic beef demand. Second, we also see a new trend emerging, a shift of consumer preference towards zero-emission vehicles, which is driven by environmental concerns, but also by policy measures, and also better choice, better performance and availability of models. This shift is going to accelerate in the medium term, and it will have a substantial impact on the demand for transport fuels and as a consequence for biofuels. This in turn means that there will be less demand for feedstock for biofuels and in particular for vegetable oils. Finally, there's a more established trend which is expected to continue, which is human consumption of sugar. This trend is expected to persist, a slow decline, as consumers are shifting towards more healthy and less sugar-intense diets. So how do these trends actually affect the demand in the EU? Let's look at some graphs. So as we can see, the demand for wheat used as food, which has been growing in the past, is expected to continue. However, demand for wheat used for other purposes like feed and biofuel production should continue to decline. The same trend can be observed also for most other cereals, including maize, which saw significant demand growth in the past. Similar consumption of oilseeds and products derived from them is expected to decrease, with the exception of sunflower. As for conventional fuels, their demand is expected to peak in near term, but then decline significantly by about 1/3 by 2031. So this in turn means that demand for biofuels would also go down, although less sharply because of high levels of blending. As a result, biofuel feedstock, especially vegetable oils, is going to decline. As for sugar, the declining demand in sugar consumption should result in decreasing dependency of EU from sugar inputs, but more on that in the next part on trade and global perspective.
Thank you very much, Dangis, for highlighting some of the information that you can find in the EU Agricultural Outlook report that was launched yesterday. And we encourage you all to go and download it from the DG Agriculture website or from this conference website. There's lots more detail in that report, including analysis of some of these trends. But now I'm going to ask the panel to reflect on this. Just earlier, we talked about the issues that affect production. And here we're looking at the demand side around the consumption patterns that affect the demands and the markets. And Hemeli, maybe I could start with you because you have in your background looking at, as a commodity analyst. And here we've heard about these big trends about demands. How do you see the sector adapting to these changing consumption patterns? What signals is it giving and how do you see farmers dealing with that?
So recently, we observed on the food sector, on the food side of the demand for feedstock, a strong increase in demand for non-GM products or for labeled products, and on top of that, for plant protein-based products as a substitute for meat. So the demand for protein crops, as a result, increases a lot, and we saw a strong rise in 2020. With lockdowns, the needs and the demand from consumers for these protein-based products benefited a lot from this context. So it implies less available volume of protein crops for the feed industry on the short term, and it strongly supported protein plant prices. Furthermore, the food demand for vegetable oils was recently strongly impacted by the 2020 by the closure of restaurants, of course, in Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. We can skip the effect of the global COVID crisis on our current and future agricultural markets. So the recovery in 2021 of food demand for grains and vegetable oils was very dynamic, but there was many supply issues, so that all needs couldn't be met. So we had the heat wave in Northern America in July, who badly affected grain and canola crops. The travel restrictions during most of 2021 limited the access to palm plantations in Malaysia for thousands of workers, which impacted our veg oil markets also in Europe. And very hot and dry weather impacted grain production in some regions of Russia. So these kind of elements will, of course, be still there in the future. So we have to keep that in mind when we speak about agricultural outlook. So in the future, the food demand will, of course, be driven by the long-term rise in population and the economic growth. And very strong growth is especially expected in organic and sustainable feedstock use by the agro-industry and by consumers, given the fact that European citizens are today very concerned with our impact on their impact on the environment through their way of consuming food. On the fuel sector, due to the COVID crisis recently, there was a very strong decrease in demand in 2020. The recovery is strong this year in 2021 for gasoline and ethanol use. It's a little bit moderated for diesel as a long-run trend of lower diesel usage is still in course. But demand for ethanol and biodiesel is quite strong in 2021. Despite the high prices of these commodities, as incorporation targets are still increasing in the EU due to the RED II implementation in several member states. Okay. In the long term, in the biodiesel sector, in order to reduce greenhouse emissions and through the mandates that were set for 2030, we expect a big decrease in diesel and biodiesel use by ricochet. And even if the advanced biodiesel see its incorporation mandate increase, and consequently we expect an industrial rapeseed oil much lower in 2030 than today. But it's not really the same thing for gasoline and for ethanol. The demand for ethanol should resist much better due to the rising use of hybrid cars and the development of electricity in the transport sector. So on top of that, the development of advanced biofuels, who should increase the use of biomass like corn, wheat straw, and cellulosic-based waste, could drive the increase in the market for these commodities, and in the end it could bring support to farmers' income. So the change in renewable policies should have less impact in the future on the grain sector than the oilseed sector.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmeline. That was a very comprehensive overview of how some of the trends in consumption are going to change the environment for farmers in there. Let me bring in Jérôme at this point, because I think one of the very striking messages we heard from Dangis was that there is a pattern towards less sugar consumption because consumers are looking for a healthier, more balanced diet. And sugar also for other areas, maybe for biofuels and biodiesel and others, will also perhaps be reduced because of what we just heard from Emmeline. So what do you see as the evolution in your sector looking forward over the coming years?
Yes, we confirm that the sugar consumption is slowly decreasing. It is in line with the public policy on sugar, salt, and fat. It is true, but on the other side, you need to know that after several waves of restructuration, the EU became a net importer of sugar. And part of this decline will lead to less import. On the other side, we are not in line with the Commission when the Commission said that the bioethanol demand will decrease. We think exactly the opposite. Why? Because contrary to popular belief, in 10 years, the car fleet will still be largely with thermic engine. It takes time to renew the park. And so the biofuel outlet for light vehicles will remain important. And in the longer term, biofuel also will be needed for transport sectors that are more difficult to electrify, especially the trucks and also aviation. Donc, we think we have a bright future for ethanol, for sure. And on top of that, you know that sugar is also a good fermentation substrate. And we can use it for green chemistry, bioplastic. Donc, really, we think that EU will still need an innovative, efficient sugar industry, both for its food security and energy security.
Thank you, Jérôme. And in fact, that links up very nicely with some of the conversation we had yesterday in the session that I was moderating around the bioeconomy, because there they were talking about just how many different uses the elements from the bioeconomy have in chemistry, in construction, in textiles, in packaging. And as you've said, Jérôme, you know, we need to have a very creative view of some of the different basic food items that we produce, that they could be used for food, but agricultural products could also be part of the circular economy and other elements. So thank you for bringing us that perspective. If we look at agriculture in a different way and see it in a more integrated way with some of our other industrial goals, this is a way of supporting farmers and their livelihoods. We're now going to look at the global dimension, the global perspective, because, of course, the EU is a big trading bloc. It's the world's biggest importer and exporter of food, but it exists in a global trading scheme. So to give us some of the highlights of what's in our EU agricultural outlook, first of all, Dingus is just going to give us a few slides to give us perspective, and then I'll ask our panel to come back in. Dingus, go ahead.
Thank you. So, the European Union is an important player in the global trade markets, whether exporting soft wheat or barley, or importing soybeans or maize. Let's now have a look at the projections in development of this trade and see whether or not the position of the EU is expected to change. As you can see from the graph, world trade in some of the most important cereals, oilseeds and sugar is forecast to grow in the next decade by an average of 1 to 1.5% a year. This growth is in line with the long-term trend of growing global consumption for these products. Some of the bigger players are actually going to see even higher growth rates in trade. For example, wheat exports by Ukraine are expected to grow by almost 4% per year. Indonesia sugar imports by 3.5%, and Brazil maize exports by 2.5%. Now, concerning the evolution of trade by EU, the picture is a bit different. The EU is forecast to reduce imports of oilseeds and oilseed meals, as well as vegetable oils, protein crops, and sugar. Also, exports of cereals are expected to go down. For example, soft wheat exports are expected to decline by about 0.7% a year, soybean imports by 1.2%, and sugar by 1.5% a year. There are, however, some products where projections show an increase in trade, like exports of barley, imports of maize, wheat, or sunflower products. Now let's have a look at how these changes stack up and affect the position of the EU on the global market. The graph on the left shows that the projected change in the net cereal trade by the European Union. We can see that net imports of maize and durum wheat are expected to grow, while exports of soft wheat are expected to decline. Only for barley, we do see an increase in net exports. As a whole, the EU is expected to remain a net exporter of cereals, but the net export volume should declined from more than 25 million tons in the last 3 years on average to about 21 million tons by 2031. As regards oilseeds, imports of soybean and soybean meals should result, declining imports of these products should decline in the reduction of net imports of oilseed complex. As for sugar, the ongoing decline in consumption is going to result in less demand for imports, putting EU on the path to become self-sufficient in this product. Finally, the graph on the right shows the share of EU in the world trade in the main arable crops and sugar. We can see that shares are expected to decline, resulting in a reduced role of EU in the global trade for cereals, oilseeds, and sugar. Thank you, and back to you, Tamsin.
Thank you very much, Dangus. Quite a sobering picture there. Looking forward to see that in most areas, the EU's participation in global trading markets is likely to decrease. So let me start by bringing in the first person to comment on this is Jana. Looking at it from a trader's perspective, how do you expect to face some of the challenges and uncertainties of the next decade? For example, if there was a failure of crops in the EU or elsewhere, how are traders going to deal with this very volatile market?
Well, I think that's the nature of trade. You just deal with volatile markets because you trade around the globe. So you look for the regions where there is sufficient supplies and connected, as I said, to the deficit areas and all that. I find it quite shocking to see how the EU is on the journey to diminishing its role it should be playing as one of the highest productivity areas when it comes to arable crop and agriculture, to the highest quality standards to producing agricultural products, and then moving towards a path where everything is reducing. And I find that questionable, and I find it really debatable, because we can produce sustainably. We have addressed the topics of technology. We need to address the topics of plant breeding and using the new technologies that plant breeding offer us, because they can be a solution also for ecological farmers to have higher yields and remain efficient per hectare with ecological wheat, barley, oats, whatever we can produce here in the EU. I think we have an obligation as one of the highest productive regions in the world to support feeding the world. We have spoken about the population growth that we foresee until 2015. And it is, I don't think, unacceptable to turn around and not support feeding the world in a region that has an obligation to do so. It is just a question of fairness. We have an obligation here to think about these elements as well. We cannot do much about weather conditions, climate, and those things unless we reduce the CO2 emissions. I would disagree with what Dangus has said about the biofuels. The biofuel market is a mandated market, so regulation drives supply and demands to a high extent in this market. For now, we don't have enough grid for electric cars in the entire European Union. I question if this can be established over the next decade or the next 2 decades, and the electricity that we supply for electric vehicles need to be green energy. Where is it coming from? That's another question we need to answer for this. So the transport sector is one of the main emittant of CO2, and biofuels today are the only solution to significantly reduce the CO2 impact this sector has on the environment and on climate. So therefore, I think biofuels will continue to play a role, and the role is determined by the legislation that is driven by the EU. So I think that's for combustion engines, as we will continue to have combustion engines for the next decade or 2 decades. I think there needs to be a solution. to also have them reduce CO2 emissions, and biofuels are the only answer that we have today to reduce CO2 emissions in those combustion engines, because they will not be replaced 100% over the next 10 or 20 years by e-fuels or other ways of transport.
Okay. Thank you, Jana. Could I just take a moment to invite Dangis to come in on this? Because I have a question, and I don't know if our audience has the same question. I'm very struck by Pedro's first presentation, because he showed us a slide when he looked at overall arable land availability in the world. And he showed that actually other parts of the world are going to increase the amount of land that's available for arable crops. And I was wondering, the figures you've just shown us look rather dramatic, and it makes it look like the EU's part of the world trade is shrinking because we're shrinking. How much of it is because other parts of the world are increasing their production, therefore we're a smaller part of a bigger global production? To what extent should we be worried and say we're losing our position a little bit, as Jana said, and for solidarity reasons, we have a role to play in feeding the world? Or how much of it is that globally we can see other parts of the world are starting to increase, perhaps to the level of productivity that we have, and so the overall cake is getting bigger? Can you help us understand that?
Available in the world, in EU, land is limited. There's also more capacity in other countries to increase yields to catch up, let's say, with us, because we are at the front, but we are also really at the moment hitting the limits, and we can see that in different yield developments which were growing faster before, but they are growing less fast now. So I think that's the reason why we see EU, yes, shrinking as percentage, but we still remain a really important player.
Okay, thank you for that, and I think that's a really important bit of perspective that we could share with the audience, because as you say, it felt very dramatic seeing those figures, but we needed to put them in perspective to understand that it is part of a global picture. And I'm very much connected to the message that we had from Pedro at the beginning, which said, look, we're part of a global mechanism, as we are a part of the world that produces high quality, and at a point where we're mechanized and we're reaching the top of our yields, we are still part of that global picture. Hemmeline, would you like to briefly come back in on this point? We're talking here about how, in a global perspective, you've got more parts of the world with more people to feed, but they're also growing more. This is an area where Europe has much to share, given the expertise, the knowledge, and the innovation that's been happening in our agricultural areas. What would you like to add to that part of the picture?
First of all, I would like to say that I agree with Jana. The food security is still a huge issue and will remain one during the next 10 years, because even if many governments make some progress into fighting global warming, by 2030, I think we can expect a lot of climatical events that can impact a lot agricultural production in several regions of the world. So the EU must remain a major player in world production for grains and oilseeds, and it has to work on its impact on biodiversity and on the quality of our environment, but we can't forget the necessity for the EU agricultural sector to feed the world. I would say also that if we take into account the EU targets for 2030 to decrease the part of first generation biodiesel and bioethanol, we should expect a much lower use of vegetable oil, and especially rape oil and palm oil in the EU. And if we need less rape oil by 2030, of course, in Europe, it will have an impact on the rapeseed crush and on rape meal production. So despite the fact that the meat sector by 2030 will be much different than today, and that the meat substitutes will probably have a bigger market share, and that we won't need to feed as many animals than today. The demand for meals will not shrink by half, I think. So we need to find these meals somewhere in the planet, and even if we expect lower import for rapeseed or canola, I think the EU crush industry will have to meet the needs for meals, and the industry will have to import much more soybean, and in order to produce this, some soybean meals that are needed by the industry, and the animal feed producers will have to import more soy meal. So we can't skip the question of sustainability on soybean and soy meals in South America, because it will be a major issue to solve by 2030. How will we find enough sustainable soybean to feed our animals, even if because we will produce much less rape meal, and despite the fact that beef meat and pig meat will decrease, I think we have to address this question during the next 10 years.
Thank you for that. We're coming towards the last 7 or 8 minutes of our conversation together, and we're getting several questions coming in that are directed at Jana, so I'm going to put you on the hot spot in a minute, Jana, if I can. But I'd like to ask you on Slido, we've got a question that we'd like you all to answer, as well as me thinking about the panelists. And we want to know what actions would make your business or your crop area fit for 2030. So on Slido, we're launching this poll, and we're asking you to put in your questions. What actions would you be taking to make your business or crop production fit for 2030? So while you're putting in those answers, I'm going to go back to Jana and ask you, we've got some messages in saying, how much of this trade is, and our role in it, is truly about feeding the world, and how much of it is maintaining the economies in Europe? So a little bit of cynicism coming in there about the extent to which we see ourselves in solidarity with other parts of the world. And also questions saying, yesterday there was a separate session all about trade, and there some of the people said, some of these goals of trading excess production from Europe is incompatible with parts of the Green Deal. And this comes to some of the trade-offs that you were talking about earlier, about if you want to not use combustion engines, you still need biofuels, but then that involves more production. So, Jana, can you just give us a little bit of perspective, first of all, on the people questioning, are we really trying to feed the world, or are we just maintaining our economies? And then secondly, what about the trade-off between our commitments to the Green Deal and sustainable development, and then our need to be part of this global trading system? So Jana, a couple of questions for you while we're seeing messages from the audience on Slido on what they're doing in their business area.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, I think why is trade existing, and that's linked to supply and demand. And if there's areas where there's deficits, then you need to bring food to those regions and also feed to help the population sustain and to nourish their animals and all that stuff. So trade is just an element to combine those regions and serve the purpose. And I think that is always going to be there. And what is driving this? The question is also, how self-sufficient are we in certain areas? And the EU is not a single market that is there by itself and can exist on its own. There is this global need of products that we grow in this region that are being produced here. At the same time, we need raw materials from other areas that are not growing here. And if I hear that there's less rapeseed oil coming up, we know that globally oils are going to be, there is a decline in the supply of oils, and that's mainly driven by a lower increase in palm oil production, which comes from the question on how much is being replanted in those areas and everything. If I look at Europe, and we produce rapeseed here. Rapeseed is one of the most sustainable crops we can have because of the deep rootings. It's great for the soil. Whenever you grow an oilseed and you crush the oilseed, you have a meal, which is a regional protein, high protein feed for animal production here in the area, and then you have an oil. And rapeseed oil is one of the most liked and healthiest oils that we produce in Europe. Not all of the oil that we supply here goes into food production. 40% is being consumed in the food sector, and 60% is consumed for technical usages, of which one is the biofuels again. So I don't really see why rapeseed should be declining. It has been declined only because fertilizer input was cut by regulation, and pesticides, insecticides, all these other inputs have been regulated. So therefore, growing rapeseed has become increasingly challenging. But with new innovations, with breeding techniques and stuff like that, this can be healed if those varieties will be found and we can grow them in our region again. So I think this whole thing about self-sufficiency, which the European Union has defined to be one of its goals, how can we achieve it if we continue to regulate the input variables paired with scarcity of arable land and maintain some degree of self-sufficiency? We debate with the Commission that imports should be reduced. Hermine has said that, or Hermelin has said that there is more imports of soybean being expected. So how does that comply then with other goals of the European Commission if we talk about rainforest deforestation and those elements? So there's a lot of things, I think, where we just need to be very transparent on the mechanisms driving certain impacts when we start regulating the market. And these impacts need to be taken into consideration and be evaluated. And I think we need to be a bit more work in that area so that the goals can be achieved to a more sustainable farming, less emissions, and a better environment for the climate.
Okay. Jana, thank you very much for answering those questions and also providing such a clear and succinct overview of some of the challenges and some of the drivers that are affecting the changes in our production, and highlighting where there are trade-offs that the EU needs to see, where some of its strategic goals around, food autonomy, food sovereignty, and food self-sufficiency, where they clash or where there's areas of consensus with our perspectives around sustainability, climate change, and reducing other impacts. And these, I think, are really important trade-offs that need a political discussion. In our last 1 or 2 minutes, I'm going to ask Dengis if he would like to comment on some of the elements that we asked you to do. So we asked you, through Slido, what actions would make your business or your crop fit for 2030? And we've got some great responses. Several of them are mentioning the issue of new breeding techniques, or NBTs. That's clearly a message coming through. People are asking for more sustainability, precision farming and agriculture, more risk management, applied research and funding. Dengis, does this look familiar? Does this look like the kinds of things that the EU's toolbox could help support with?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, each sector is preparing, no doubt, for the 2030, and we will need all the possible ideas and like Jana mentioned, to have better breeding techniques, better rapeseed, for example. We reduced our outlook for rapeseed because of these problems, because of the less productive, less yields and more problems in growing rapeseed. So indeed, we will need all these tools to stay competitive and have an important place in trade in the world.
Excellent, thank you very much. And I'd like to say a very warm thank you on your behalf to the members of the panel. First of all, to Pedro in the beginning for setting the scene for us and laying out some of the elements that we then picked up in our conversation, to Hemeline, to Jana, and to Jerome, and of course to Dengis, who shared some of the input. One thing that I would take away from our conversation this morning is that farmers and people involved in the agricultural sector cannot be left alone with dealing with some of these enormous global and societal challenges. So whatever direction we decide to take in our political perspective around climate change or around sustainability, farmers and the agricultural sector need to be part of that conversation. They are a key element in this equation, and then we need to use our entire policy toolbox to help them make the transition to where we need to go. And we also need to recognize just how far many of our farmers have already come in reducing their emissions and working towards a balanced agriculture. The message as well, I think that there is a range of farms, from very small to very large, and our toolbox and our support perhaps needs to be adapted to make sure that all of the farmers are getting the support that they need. So I'd like to say thank you, and we're closing this session now. We're going to have a 15-minute coffee break, and the next session will start promptly at 11:45. Thank you for joining us.